Bonjour, bonjour. Our panelists said they're ready to go, which means we are ready to go too. So welcome back, everybody. Back to the Manitoba Heritage Summit, the Sommet sur le patrimoine du Manitoba. For those that might just be joining us this afternoon, my name is Rob Malo. I'm the host for today, Robert Malo. Our next panel discussion is a very interesting one. It's on Indigenous heritage, Indigenous initiatives, and issues in heritage preservation in Manitoba. We've got a very special moderator, Keisha Paul, who's a host of at CBC Radio 1. So Keisha, I'm thinking I'm going to let you introduce the panelists. You're familiar with everybody. You had a little chit chat there. So I'm going to pass things on to you. And merci beaucoup. Thank you for being here, all our panelists, and let's enjoy this next discussion.
Well, thank you so much for having me, and thank you for that intro. Now I need to try and one-up you, so let's go for it. In any case, my name is Keisha Paul. Thank you so much for allowing me and inviting me to moderate this panel. Of course, I have just been named the host of the weekend morning show on CBC Radio 1, where myself and Mr. Gordon Goldsboro get to spend time together for Abandoned Manitoba. But this is not that. This is a special panel that has been set up to get into some of the nitty-gritty, if you will, with regards to the Indigenous perspectives. And I have some people here on the panel who are really going to help identify that more and speak to some of the issues. So of course, the actual title is Indigenous Heritage, Indigenous Initiatives and Issues in Heritage Preservation in Manitoba. We have three panelists, and I'll go with ladies first with Brandi Cable. Brandi, thank you so much for being here. Brandi, I'll let you elaborate a little bit more on you, but I'd like to say some things first off. Brandi is a Cree woman, and she's from Northern Manitoba. Now, what's really cool, and I want to say congratulations as well, is because she's just graduated from the University of Manitoba with an honors degree in anthropology. So congratulations goes out to Brandi. What I think is really cool, and that I gleaned from the bio that was put there, is that, of course, Brandi has gone to different places with regards to the study of anthropology. So it's not just based here in Manitoba, but also Texas, Poland, Cyprus, and spoken at conferences throughout Edmonton, Alberta, and Oxford in the UK. And what I really appreciate about that is that it's getting perspectives throughout Turtle Island, but also sharing that throughout the world. And I think that's really, really special, Brandi. Looking forward to what you're bringing to the table on this panel and just in general. And I hope that you keep in touch with the weekend morning show so we can hear more of what you're doing. I also want to make sure that I introduce Wayne Stranger. Wayne was just recently on the CBC's Unreserved with Rosanna Deerchild. And I'm really thankful to be hearing what you had to say today, Wayne. I heard you over the airwaves just this weekend, and Wayne did a bike tour throughout Winnipeg with Rosanna Deerchild and actually spoke to some of the monuments that we had. One of the most prolific moments for me in that time that you spent with Rosanna was also the fact that you spoke about Louis Riel and where his statue is placed with regards to the Manitoba Legislative Building, not in the front, but in the back. And I'd love to hear more about your perspectives, not just with regards to that, but regards to many different things. So very much looking forward to that. And of course, we have Niigaanwewidam Sinclair. Hello, Niigaan, is going to be on this panel today. Now, I really wanted to not just highlight everything that's on the bio, because you can see that on the bio, but I just wanted to share some stories with regards to Niigaan. Anytime you call on him, I don't know if it's anybody, but when you call on Niigaan, he's always there. You see him on TV, you see him on the radio, you see him all over the place. And it's not because he has an ego, it's because he's a very humble guy, but he wants to speak to these issues and speak to the perspectives and also give other people a time to shine with regards to these things. Anytime we've called on him, he's always there. I know Niigaan from way back at Kelvin High School, and wow, what you've done from there is just absolutely amazing. So definitely looking forward to spending this time with all three of you. And for everyone in the audience, I want to make sure that questions and anything like that, make sure to get answered. So you can type them in the chats. I'm sure someone's going to be facilitating with questions being asked. And I'm not sure who would like to speak first, if it's Brandi, Niigaan, or Wayne, but please, I think everyone has about 15 minutes. You can go a little more, a little less, and I'd like to moderate questions in between as well. Brandi, you want to take it away?
Yeah, somebody should go over there.
I can go first. First off, apologies if my voice is a little shaky. Despite having done conference presentations, I still get nervous. So I'll try and share my screen. Hopefully there's no issues with that. How do I get rid of it? I don't know how to get rid of the tab at the top. So is it okay if I just leave it like this?
Yeah.
Is that okay? So Keisha did a great introduction. So my name is Brandi Cable. I recently graduated with an honors degree in anthropology from University of Manitoba, just a couple months ago, actually, in June. I currently work as an anthropologist doing contract work with the community in northern Manitoba, as well as doing research with the Department of Anthropology at the University of Manitoba. I am a member of a variety of groups, including being the Indigenous Outreach Coordinator for the Manitoba Archaeological Society, student representative for the University of Manitoba Respectful Repatriation Ceremony Working Circle, and the former Indigenous representative of the University of Manitoba Anthropology Students Association. So I'm here to speak about my experiences studying and working in the field of anthropology, as well as any challenges that I may have faced. So I'll start off with some positives. Studying anthropology has completely changed the way that I see the world and how I understand myself. Anthropology has allowed me to learn more about my family's history, as well as get more involved in projects and initiatives that help the Indigenous community. I would also like to speak to the immense support that I've received from the Department of Anthropology, especially in my final years of my degree. I want to give a special shout out to Dr. Benjamin Collins, who invited me to be part of his archaeological project in May of last year. Not only has Dr. Collins helped me gain valuable research experience and the opportunity to publish my first article, he provided an example of what a positive research relationship looks like and how to set boundaries for future academic encounters. Dr. Collins did not treat me just as a student, he treated me like a colleague. There was no hierarchy. My voice was just as valuable as anyone else's at any stage of the project. And when I encountered a less than positive research offer more recently, I was able to recognize the red flags and decline. And lastly, I'm happy to have found a field of study that I wholeheartedly enjoy and find a purpose in. But there have been some challenges along the way, of course. None of these challenges would have deterred me from continuing my studies, but they should be mentioned nonetheless. My biggest struggle at University of Manitoba was that I was often the only Indigenous student in my anthropology classes. I didn't meet another Indigenous anthropology undergrad until my 5th and final year. Now, I don't know everyone in my classes, so I can't say for sure, but I can at least say that majority of the time I was the only Indigenous student in the class. This was frustrating, especially when I began to learn more about the negative relationship between anthropologists and Indigenous peoples in the past. I was given plenty of support by professors in the Department of Anthropology, and I am grateful for those who have helped me on my journey. But in those moments when imposter syndrome was at its highest, when I started to feel like I didn't belong in the classrooms that I sat in, the one thing that would have truly helped me would be to have another student who could understand how I felt. I had Indigenous friends and I had anthropology friends, but nobody who could understand both sides. I also struggled in navigating my way through the university as someone who moved here from a northern community. A lot of the time I felt guilty that I was choosing post-secondary over learning and practicing cultural traditions or learning my language. There's only so far that a language app or a language class can get me. So I, like many others, have had to move away from home to study. In my case, this is because anthropology is not offered in northern Manitoba. One of my long-term goals is to bring anthropology and archaeology to the north, ideally through the University College of the North in the Paul and Thompson. Another challenge has been the public perceptions of the field of anthropology, especially within the Indigenous community. Anthropology has a dark racist history, and there's no denying that. However, there's been much growth in the discipline over the decades, and it is actually very useful to Indigenous peoples in a number of ways. There's the role of archaeology and heritage preservation, allowing Indigenous people to learn more about where they come from and how their ancestors lived in the past. There's the role of cultural anthropology and processes of repatriation, which is currently happening at the University of Manitoba. There's the role of forensic anthropology in the identification of human remains in missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit cases. And one of the most important examples currently is the role of archaeology in the residential school searches. So, unfortunately, a majority of Indigenous people either only know of the negative and harmful past of anthropology, or they simply don't know what it is. It took my own parents a couple years to really understand the purpose of my degree. So these two themes of either negative association or lack of acknowledgement even shows through in some of the courses I've taken outside of the Department of Anthropology, which has made for some awkward encounters. I also want to mention my experiences abroad, as I have studied in places such as Texas, Poland, and Cyprus. There are many positives associated with gaining experience in other countries. Not only do I get to see some breathtaking places, but I also gain experience in topics that may not have been available to me in Manitoba. For example, I focus on bioarchaeology and forensic anthropology. I wanted experience tailored specifically to working with human remains. One of my favorite parts of traveling has been sharing stories of who I am and where I come from. Just as in my university classes, I am the only Indigenous student in the programs that I participate in abroad. Students and instructors alike are very interested in listening to the stories I tell, which also gives me the opportunity to educate on issues that Indigenous peoples face in Canada. I'm very passionate about sharing the stories of missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit cases, especially those cases that have been largely ignored by the RCMP. While there are many positive experiences and a wealth of opportunities that come out of studying abroad, there are the occasional negative experiences. A particular example that I will mention happened over the summer, in which I was stereotyped by a supervisor during one of my programs. I won't mention which one because it is resolved and I don't want to bring negative attention to a wonderful program. Anyways, I was speaking to another student about an event pertaining to Indigenous peoples in Canada. While speaking about this, a supervisor came up behind me and just blurted out that I don't look Native. So I was taken aback and I laughed it off, but I really wish that I would have said something in that moment, because what does an Indigenous person look like? She doesn't know anything about my family, where I grew up, or how I lived my life. And the worst part, that this wasn't even the result of a cultural difference, because this individual was American, so they should have known better. A second example comes from my week in Oxford when I was presenting at the university. I was already feeling the imposter syndrome creeping in when I arrived, because how was I going to present at the most prestigious university in the world in front of academics who are much more knowledgeable and experienced than I am? Nonetheless, I was walking around the university and checking out some of the shops. I walked past the shop and saw some cool chessboards. I love chess. But my heart dropped when I saw a chessboard right in front of the window that had stereotypical depictions of Indigenous people as the pawns and European colonizers as the kings and queens. So even while abroad, I still can't escape being stereotyped myself or seeing stereotypes in public. So what I will end off with is mentioning the need for more Indigenous anthropologists. Like I mentioned previously, there are a multitude of ways in which anthropology can be of use to Indigenous peoples and their communities. Indigenous youth are passionate about giving back to their communities and they want to get involved. They go into fields such as education, social work, and law, which is great, but they often don't realize that anthropology could also be a good fit for them. There needs to be more public education, especially targeting Indigenous youth, on what anthropology is and what kinds of opportunities there are. In a discipline historically dominated by old European men, we need more Indigenous voices now more than ever. Majority of anthropological research done on and about Indigenous peoples is not actually done by Indigenous academics. If more Indigenous youth are encouraged and supported in pursuing anthropology, it is their voices that will be leading the narrative on anthropological research concerning their own people and their own history. So thank you for listening to my presentation, and thank you to Alicia Gooden, the president of the Manitoba Archaeological Society, for getting me on board with MAS as the Indigenous Outreach Coordinator. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Brandi. And I don't want to scold you, but I want to say that everything that you said was so great. And I almost, you have such a strong voice and you have so many amazing things to say. So yeah, you don't need the preamble about your voice. It rang true. There's a lot of interesting subject matter that I actually even want to pick at, but I need to find out from the team if we can ask questions now, or would you like them to be saved for the end? I'm waiting for maybe a chat. Someone can chat to me and tell me.
I think we're just going to save it for the end.
Save it for the end? Okay, beautiful,
Yeah.
beautiful. Well, then I will, thank you so much, Brandi. Everybody keep your questions ready for Brandi. Don't forget them because they're coming at the end. But now I'd like to turn the table over to Wayne. Wayne, we would love to hear what you have to say.
Hi, just listening to Brandi. First of all, I'll just introduce with a little bit of background. Can you hear me okay? Everybody hear me all right? Anyways, I might be squirming around here. I kind of hurt my back yesterday, so just trying to stay comfortable. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, good. So yeah, I too graduated of U of M in 2006 with my fine arts degree, honors degree, and 2008 with an education degree. And my reason why I'm a storyteller, and I've chosen sculpture to do it, just taking advantage of some natural ability, I guess. People in my family were always good, excellent artists. They could sketch and draw, everybody, dad, brothers, uncles, whoever. So when I decided to go to university, I thought I'll take advantage of that and just work with my strength, which is art. So I went with that. Again, listening to Brandi, kind of a similar experiences, through the education, and being sort of marginalized, and through the history, which is not really taught about us, especially in fine art. There was like 3 or 4 pages for example, 3 or 4 pages in one of the texts we used, full of fine art illustrations and all that were only for the First Nations. That's all they could find. One of them was a picture of a teepee. When I went up to the professor and explained the bias, they said, well, we're in Manitoba here. I said, there are a lot of artists, there are a lot of visual artists in every discipline. And this was in 20 years ago. There's a lot more now. But I majored in sculpture because I like working with my hands that way. It is very demanding. I majored in bronze sculpture. So there isn't anybody doing that in Manitoba except me right now. If there is, I'd like to know who they are so I could sort of connect. It's going back a little further. I went to ceremonies most of my life. We didn't follow the ceremonial way at home. Finding out now that the damage that residential school had done to my parents and everybody around us, they didn't want to talk about anything like that. I wanted to bring forward from what I learned through elders and tell those stories. There's so many stories and perspectives to share. And then even going even further and tying it in historically with what has happened to our people, and tell the story that way, visually, sculpturally, and trying to capture moments where people might ask some questions. And then for me, like my specialty is realism. So if I'm going to do a sculpture, I'll do it as realistically as I can. At least right now, that's what I'm working on. There's one project that I'm waiting for in particular. I know when we did the walk or the bike ride with Rosanna Deerchild, we talked about some sculptures. And because I would go around looking, when I was living in the city, I'd go looking at every available piece of public work there was, especially sculpture, especially bronze, and I would get close to it. and I find out who the artist was, take a look at the quality of the work, where did they get the work done, because there's always something cast into the work that tells you where the work was finished. And when we kind of took a step back, especially at the legislature, it's all about colonialists. It's all about, but what same thing we with terminology was dead European white guys. And I was thinking, why have they been so prominent for so long to put that type of imagery, you know, where it is, and get that type of exposure, that type of presence and prominence. And that's something that I would like to see shared a little more with our own imagery, our own stories, our own prominence. You know, I would ride out to Assiniboine Park and I'd see the Leo Mall sculpture garden. And I'm thinking, okay, wonderful work, but where is Indigenous sculpture garden? That's what I would say right away. Where are our stories being told? You know, and for years, and it's kind of common knowledge, like our histories were unmentioned or forgotten about. And I'd tried to draw on some of that and then use that as motivation to tell more stories of who we are. You know, and in my community here, I'm working on a Peguis statue, a Chief Peguis statue, which is life size, and I've done it in full detail. I'm in the process. The mold it's been created. The mold has happened, and now we're moving on to the next steps, which is wax and ceramic shell and pouring and welding and all that assembly. It's a lot of work. But we want the community here took an initiative to tell the story of Peguis, because he was our first leader, you know, where we are here in Manitoba, and start to try and tie that into his history and where he came from, how he came from, and then the things that, you know, the people had to endure just to get over here, because they originally came from around the Sault Ste. Marie area in Ontario, and they migrated this way. And then there's further to add to that story where our reserve used to be in the St. Peter's area, which is Selkirk, St. Andrews. That's where our reserve was. And then we got removed from that area to where we are now, which is the swamp of the Inner Lake. So we were removed from some very rich and profitable farmland, which my family and other families were already farming. And we were relocated here to the Inner Lake and had to start all over. And I can remember my grandfather, Solomon, and in the 80s. Yep. My connection is unstable. It's saying, am I breaking up?
It had broken up for just a second there, Wayne, but you can continue. I think it's going good again.
Yeah, because on that Starlink thing, and it's kind of raining and snowing, so yeah, there might be some buffering or whatever they call it. But yeah, telling those stories, and then again, being Indigenous, being First Nation Indigenous, there's a wealth of stories to tell and a wealth of truths to tell. And one of them that we undertake as a community here is, again, telling Chief Peguis and his story, because it's not really taught about, it's not really told, it's not really mentioned. And this is where now the government announced a few years ago they're going to put a Chief Peguis statue on the legislative grounds. So I put in a submission for that. I'm still waiting to hear. Me and my team, I team with a group of architects and other artists. Oh, geez. I don't know what happened there.
We can hear you. We can still hear you.
Oh, there. Can you see me now? I don't know what's going on here. I haven't used this computer for a while. So am I okay now? Okay. Yeah, so telling those stories and trying to tell them the truth about them in our perspectives, not what history has sort of whitewashed or left out. And yeah, a lot of the truth kind of packs a sting, you know. Nobody likes to hear the truth because it hurts. So it again, we're kind of in the midst of a lot of truths coming out about how the Indigenous people here were treated as Canada developed as a country. You know, I heard those stories from my grandparents about the relocation of our reserve. Now we're dealing with another problem, which is historical flooding here in this area. And to this date, nothing has been done to prevent the flooding. If we get another big dump of snow and the right combination of weather next spring, there's a high risk we could flood again. So that's stuff that needs to be told, because historically we were never here. We had some of the best land in Manitoba and we were removed, and you can look that up. There's an act of law, St. Peter's Act. I can't remember exactly what year it was enacted, which effectively stops us from ever going back to that land. The government made reparations in the way of surrender claim and TLE claims, which was kind of ironic because the land was ours. They removed us and then they gave us money to buy our land back. So it's kind of like, okay, that doesn't make any sense, but you know, they tried, you know, and then it was done legally, you know, through the courts, and money was exchanged, and we have since acquired land that will add to our land base and hopefully, you know, add to our history and our position here as First Nation in Manitoba, and a better position than where we were, you know, all those years ago. So telling those stories, really, that's what I tried to do. Some of the stuff that Brandi mentioned might be some storytelling items in there. I usually try and take something and research, of course, and get it all accurate. And accuracy was the biggest part, because when I Sundanced, I was part of the Sundance for 30 years now. Never actually danced all those 30 years, but I was always a part of it one way or another, singing or dancing or whatever. And I wanted to tell those Sundance stories in sculpture, and I did when I was in university. There's 4 sculptures that I did in bronze, scale, half life size. And they talked of a Sundance, and they talked of what really happened. And I used myself as the model. I was the guy that actually did those in those images. I did that. I dragged the buffalo skulls. I pierced. I did many things, and I showed them through that sculpture. So trying to capture that truth and stay true and stay true to the old teachings and what the elders have always taught me. They said to talk about what you've earned the right to talk about. So that's what I've done. I've told some Sundance stories with much more to go. There's songs, there's different ceremonies throughout the year, not just, you know, something about a TP only, you know. I was actually privileged to create a statue for murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls for Saugeen First Nation 3 years ago. And the sculpture stands there, and I did a statue of a jingle dressed dancer in full regalia. And that was to help a place for them to gather. That's where it's standing now, in the community, where they will gather and then honor those that are murdered or missing. So they approached me to do that, and it was quite the amount of work, but I finished it. So my foundry is located here in Peguis. It's the only art foundry in Manitoba. It may be the only Indigenous art foundry in Canada. I don't know, but there's not too many of them around. Toronto, Regina, Calgary are the ones that I know of. So they're kind of spread out. So yeah, it's a strict, difficult discipline to do the work and see it through. So, but yeah, I think that's enough for now, I guess. I don't want to take up too much more time.
No, that was fantastic, Wayne. And, you know, I really appreciated you. Well, first of all, I owe you an apology, because I was so excited about sharing the story about Unreserved that I didn't actually introduce you properly. So I apologize for that. And I also want to, I think it's really interesting that the fact that you're doing bronze work and it's so permanent.
Yeah.
And there's such a huge opportunity, even in and amongst the movement that you spoke about with regards to your First Nation, but that permanency to have that story that doesn't go anywhere and people have to confront. I'm really happy to hear about it. Again, everybody who has questions for Wayne, please make sure you write them down, jot them down, because we don't want you to miss out. We will have a question period coming up, but now I would like to turn it over to Niigaan and hear a little bit more about what you have to say, sir. So go ahead.
So bonjour and didoi magraduk, Niigaanwewidam and Digitakas Namagush Dodem, even when I'm Omayayan. It's nice to be here. My name's Niigaan, and I'm just so privileged that we got to hear from two brilliant Indigenous people working at Heritage. I've actually been messaging Brandi right now going, we got to have you in the department. Like, we got to bring you over tomorrow. So our students got to hear from you. Because I think, you know, oftentimes in Indigenous studies, Wayne was talking about how these things are not taught. We do teach them in Indigenous studies is pretty much the one spot of the university that we do teach about these issues every day and in all of our classes around the issue of representation and history and knowledge. And I want to give this panel and all of the attendees just a kind of a broad framework to think about two big issues involving heritage and knowledge. So I've got a set of questions that I want to add on here. But for those of you that don't know me, I don't just do stuff on CBC and the Free Press and that kind of thing. I'm a researcher. So, I mean, that's my original gig. And so, you know, before that, I was a high school teacher. And in different ways, I did research kind of working with people. But I came from a time much like how Wayne described about the misrepresentation of our people. And one of the things is tonight at 7 p.m., I wrote a small piece that describes my experience growing up in reading the Winnipeg Free Press. And I think it ties very much with what we're talking about for today, because I won't spoil that piece too much, so you can read it if you want. It'll be online. But it's the 150th year of the Winnipeg Free Press this year in 6 weeks. And so we are publishing a special edition on the 150th anniversary of the Free Press. As many of you know, I work there. I've been there for 4 years now. And we, you know, talking about how it was that I saw Indigenous peoples being archived in the newspaper growing up in the 1980s. We were one of two things, and I think they've both been touched upon by Brandi and Wayne in their presentations. The first thing that I saw was Indigenous people used to sell products. That was the thing that I most often saw. There were often Indigenous peoples on, you know, selling tobacco for the most part, selling American nationalism on pennies, selling Indigenous, you know, we all remember Butter of the Lakes or whatever it's called, right? Selling butter, whatever it might be. And the second thing that I saw, and I think that we can all remember this, any of you grew up in the 80s, you would have seen it. It was the front cover of the second section, which was the life section in the Free Press. And it was Manitoba's Most Wanted. And it would always be 10 pictures. And it would, you know, 9 of them would be Indigenous, exclusively every single week. So if you were a non-Indigenous person, your first impression of Indigenous people would be that we're all criminals and savages, very much like the textbooks that Wayne was speaking about way back. And so you got this message in school that Indigenous peoples are deficient and backwards. And then you get a message in the newspaper that's the exact same message, that we're all a bunch of violent killers who just waiting around the bush, waiting around the corner to kill you. And so, yeah, that's what I saw growing up. So I write a little piece about that tonight, and I think that's worth talking a little bit about how the paper has shifted. I think the Winnipeg Free Press is, I'm biased, but it is the most competent it's ever been. It's the most diverse, certainly it's ever been, and it's the most critically conscious that it's ever been. Certainly the most racialized newspaper that I've ever seen at the Free Press. And as a result, the level of the quality of the newspaper has radically increased. And I also think that the same thing could be said about CBC, the other place that I work. It is the most cognizant and critically aware in history. And I think it still stumbles, but if evidenced by today's story, which involves the issue of the identity of Mary Ellen Trappell, a very strong Indigenous rights advocate in British Columbia. You can read about that story and the tremendous resources that got put into that story. Literally probably 30, 40 reporters to go to investigate this issue of is the child advocate for Indigenous children in BC. Is she Indigenous or not? And all the different intricacies involving that. I'm not here to tell you how to think about that. Go out and read it. I think it's an amazing piece. Amazing piece just for the mere sake that the CBC would dedicate probably $1 million or so, or $500,000 into investigating this issue. And it gets many of the things of the stories highly problematic, but it's worth reading. I want to bring two parts without already, clearing my throat for the first few minutes here, but I just want to give a few different things to think about. Here's what I want to ask you to think about when we talk about heritage and knowledge. Heritage is inherently about knowledge. Who controls knowledge? Who gets to dictate what knowledge is? How do we archive knowledge and pass it on to future generations? That's what heritage is. It's saying this is valuable. Here's what we're going to hold up. And then here's how we're going to pass it on to future generations. There's lots of questions around those two definitions and those two terms, knowledge and heritage. And you have to ask the question is, what is knowledge and how has knowledge been dictated or defined to us in the past? Most oftentimes, for example, you have been conditioned to think that knowledge only matters when it's on squiggly lines on a piece of paper like this. But that's not what our knowledge is. Our knowledge is archived. The biggest lie I've ever been told in my life is that we are oral peoples. We are not oral peoples. We are oral peoples undergirded by the written. We have always had writing. It's just that writing doesn't look the same as Western people have done it, which is squiggly lines on the page. In fact, Western writing didn't start that way either. We started with visual representations, symbols. We didn't use vocables to describe writing. Our writing is more about ideas than resembling speech. So the key of it is understanding that our writing is based in beadwork, tattoos, birch bark scrolls. And so therefore we have always had knowledge. It's just that knowledge has been deemed for one reason or another to belong in a museum and not a library. And that's a power decision. That therefore illustrates how we deem heritage. We think that Indigenous knowledge is based in kind of those things that are out there. Like we often think of, like I'll give an example of the Inukshuk. We think of the Inukshuk as heritage, but only when it's being tied to power, which is like an Olympic logo. But we often don't think of heritage as a living entity, as a living existence, something that moves and shifts. And that when we place it within certain contexts, we freeze it in time, so that therefore we immediately cut off Indigenous knowledge from the source, which are Indigenous peoples ourselves, which is that you need to have the oral cooperating with the written in order for it to be a living document or a living entity. So we have to think of knowledge and heritage as something living. Therefore, we begin to think of it something as transmission, right? So how might a drum be an archive of knowledge, but must participate with a living entity in order to illustrate knowledge and to therefore be heritage that's passed on? So what it means is that we have to think of knowledge and heritage as something animate. And in our language, we do. The two names that we use to describe stories, for example, are the Debajimowanak or the Atazukonic, which are both names that describe living beings. Those are how we describe stories. That's how we pass on stories. And the only way that a story can be living is as if it's told. And it continues to engage in an audience, meaning that it's not something that we just fix, but that it must have an interpretation or a person or a living entity, a living people grown with it. That's why I think what Wayne's doing is so exciting, because what he's doing is he's bringing forth not just stories, but also illustrating the modern and future life of a people through that creation of that piece, right? And then those pieces that are then have a living entity attached to it. When we fix things in time, we also fix a sense of people in time. And that's where we get into ethics. The real problem, I think, for the most part with heritage, and this is really identified very well with Brandi's description, is that it gets fetishized. It gets frozen in a time period. And now what I mean by that is anybody can go to a gift shop and see a dream catcher or a totem pole or even a feather under a set of glass, for example. The problem is that when the context is removed from the people themselves, it becomes appropriation, which is theft. Appreciation is a living being, a living people, a living nation that's attached to that and benefits from the living relationship with that piece. And that's where we get into appreciation. So I'm going to talk a little bit about appropriation and appreciation in just a minute. But I want to just illustrate to you that the work that you're doing and the work that we all do in knowledge and heritage has the ability to harm very deeply. And we've seen that in what Wayne was talking about with the public illustrations. I wrote an essay about the public art, the use of public art in Winnipeg, which is inherently colonial. And it is only now that Indigenous and racialized Two-Spirit and then other Canadian artists that are really pushing back on that notion of public art as something that we promote a sense of a one-dimensional nationalism. And the evidence of that is on the Manitoba legislature, there are no evidence of Indigenous peoples other than a statue of Riel. And even that is a sense of fetishization because it's cut off. It has a one-dimensional interpretation other than to say that it's cut off from the people themselves. And to be able to create a relationship that has a sense of a living purpose, it must have a living entity like the Métis Nation or the Red River Métis attached to it. And so coming from this very damaging history in terms of knowledge and heritage, we really have to think about race, gender, sexuality, and nationalism as inherently tied with the ways that we have stored knowledge in the past. We really have to think about the ways that we define appropriation and appreciation, and that we work very hard in our work in heritage that we don't fall into the appropriation category. There's lots of different methods that you can use to describe this, the ways in which communities can benefit. I personally always use the OCAP principles, which are ways that I teach my students to say, these are ethical ways that you can engage with Indigenous communities involving ownership, control, access, and possession of the knowledge of that community so that they have a control, not just in terms of the dissertation or the thesis or the project that you're working on, the essay, the book, but that also that they benefit from that and they benefit from a living relationship with you over the control of that information. And that you can't just simply say, you know, we're encouraged as academics to be the most exploitative as possible because we're actually rewarded with tenure, with money, with success and you know, our names on billboards at the airport when we are the most exploitative. As academics, we are celebrated when we steal because we put our name on a book and we say, oh, we invented this, when it was really Indigenous communities that invented that and your name should be appearing on the cover. As an academic, I get penalized when I don't just have my own name on a document. When I have two names on a document, they go, oh, that's not really work then. That's not really valuable work. And never mind the fact that one time I wrote an essay with 18 students. And so we put all 19 names on the cover. And when it came up to time of assessing that in value, they said, your role, you really didn't have a role in all of that. It's one of 19, so we won't even consider it in your tenure and promotion application. That's exactly the kind of problem in the university at large. We have been bred, we've been conditioned, and we are still rewarded to be thieves, to be those to take from Indigenous communities, publish, profit, and then continue to exploit throughout academic institutions, throughout governmental institutions, throughout all different elements of society, even filmmakers. You know, filmmakers create all of these Hollywood films or even, you know, Canadian Film Board, National Film Board. And oftentimes filmmakers are encouraged as possible to boil Indigenous culture down to these fetishized objects, these very simple stories. On the nightly news, what they call a pack, which is a 30 to 60 second spot, you are encouraged to be the most extreme and to paint Indigenous peoples in the most black and white ways possible. The evidence of that, for example, is how many of stories do you know about Indigenous peoples that are always about they came from nothing and they became something? The nothing is always the community, meaning communities mean nothing. And the something is always something in the city or capitalism or neoliberalism or Canadian, and that's something. And we are always in the media telling that story. It's the endless story of media. So that's appropriation. Appreciation is a community that's seen as something, a community that is encouraged and that is rewarded for operating and collaborating with a creator, with an artist, and that therefore that community is then coming along with the piece. That's the living relationship I was speaking about that goes within our very language involving heritage and knowledge. So that's just a quickie little thing that I just wanted to leave you with here. And like I said, here's some, oops, sorry. That's the questions that I had right here. You're free to, debate those or talk about those in either the Q&A section here, or we could just simply move on to something else. I mean, certainly I would love to hear more from Wayne and Brandi as we go, but Big Niigaanwewidam, thank you for letting me fill in on this. I was a last minute addition. I hope that we all send our prayers and our thoughts to the Niigaanwewidam family in the time that what they're going through at the moment. And I'm very honored to be able to fill in for Barb. I saw her yesterday morning and I told her I would be doing this, and she sends her love to all of you. And so thanks very much. I hope that you send that all back to her.
Thank you so much, Niigaanwewidam, and also for that reminder there at the end. Yes, we will definitely do that. And I really love the fact that you included all those questions that we can get through. I know there's somebody who had asked a question already. Unless anybody from the summit wants to guide me in a different direction, I was thinking maybe we can go into the question that was posed first, and then maybe even play with some of the questions that you provided, Niigaanwewidam, if that's okay with the group, as well as with Wayne and with Brandi.
Yeah, sounds good.
Sounds good. Okay. And also
Keisha,
definitely.
I just want to let you know, take the time you need. We can adjust the next panel if there are more questions, or if you want to take a few more minutes than what's allowed.
Excellent. Okay, well, let's just go for it. Let us go with the first question that was posed. So this person says, what are the opportunities for arts and knowledge sharing at what was Kapiong and the HBC building and Bank of Montreal buildings? Now, I'm not sure who would like to take that first one, but or even if it needs to be clarified at all, but that's what was written. It was from an attendee. I don't have their name, so I will let.
I can speak a little bit about this because I've written columns about it. I don't know if anyone else has written about this or thought about this or had people that are working on this. Wayne, I think you unmuted yourself. Sorry, go ahead.
I can kind of speak a little to the Kapiong, knowing only what everybody else knows, that there was a pretty comprehensive plan in place and developers and this and that. And I'm just hoping that there's space for public art. Factor that in and have that be, if there is any art, be the main focus, Indigenous artists first. Maybe that's the place where we can have our own sculpture garden, our own art gallery, our own whatever it takes, whatever's out there. And that's what I always advocate for. If it's out there, why can't we have it too? Because no one is really telling our story, and they haven't really told it very accurately. And like you said, Niigaanwewidam, it's usually from a place of disparage, came from nothing. Well, yeah, I left the reserve. I went to Winnipeg to gain some knowledge specifically with the art I chose, and then I'm back here now. So I guess I'm back to nothing. But no
way. That is the story that's always. Look up any story that involves Jordan Tutu, and that's the way they describe him all the time.
Yeah.
And do we all realize that he came from an incredible people and family and land? That's the reason he succeeded in the NHL. It's not because that he came to some town to play hockey.
Yeah.
And anyways, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you there, Wayne. Sorry.
Oh, and then that too, like Jordan Tutu. My main driving force behind me was the ceremony, was the Sundance in particular, and seeing how spirit works. And when I had completed my first Sundance, it was so moving. It just blew me away. I kind of had a lot of questions after, and what I wanted was for people to experience what I see what I see. So that's why I chose the sculpture, because you couldn't take a camera in there. You couldn't be documenting anything or whatever. It's like if you weren't there, you never seen it. So I did recreate specific aspects of the Sundance ceremony in sculpture in bronze for people to share with them so that they could understand more and realize how hard like some of us still work. We still do that today. There's still a circle of us that carry on the traditions, the old ways, and that is the driving force for whatever I'm doing, whatever I have questions, whenever I need to regenerate. This is where I go. This is, I fall back on those teachings and traditions, and it's not a place of, nothing. It's really rich and wealthy. And I used to have those debates with my professors in university. They were trying to push me into art shows and say, you got to go see that artist. You got to go see that other artist over there. I said, well, why? I said, well, you need to be influenced. I said, well, I have my influences already. I said, it's grandfathers, grandmothers, spirit warriors through the ceremony. And the one prof is like, whoa, says, you got a lot to tell. I said, yeah, I do. I said, so I'm good. Yeah, I'll support, if you need a show of support, I'll support other artists, but I don't need to be pushed into an area and say, this is where you need your influences to come from. And I had it out with a few other profs, and I said, you know what, you're not the only source of inspiration. Said, I have my Sundance stories, I have my ceremony stories, I have the elder stories, my own personal experience to draw from. And I said, that's a lifetime of information and very valuable. So that's where I'm coming from.
I just want to say that we have such little time that I don't want to take up too much more time here. I've already talked lots, but what Wayne's talking about is an imbalance that is embedded within the fabric of society. And it is that Western aesthetics, meaning the sense of art, the sense of beauty, the sense of what's important, is cooked within the very nature of all institutions. Yeah. So Wayne will have, not to say I could speak on his behalf, but what he just said there was, he's surrounded by Western art. Like like I'm standing in a university, I am immersed in the history of Western civilization. Like I don't need any more of it. Like I don't need to go to this over thing. I'm already immersed in it. Like I'm over my head and 50 feet above and immersed in this fluid of Western civilization. And so what I mean is that I was the president of Urban Shaman Art Gallery for 2-3 years, I think. It is so amazing to me that people don't value that institution, because it's the only Indigenous run artist collective in the country. And then we have to compete with all of the art galleries in which you're in a society that loves your art, will celebrate your art, give you millions of dollars. And we have to compete saying, because most people have never seen Indigenous art, so they don't realize that it's absolutely giving different aesthetics, different ideas, the things that Wayne's talking about and all the other things, meaning that it's a different way to view art, it's a different way to think, and it's a different way to conceive of even what is the institution of expression or aesthetic or beauty. And so, but we're forced to compete for funding, for grants, for basically public dollars with institutions that are immersed in that doing, expert level, giving people exactly what they want and they desire. And so guess who never wins? Urban Shaman Art Gallery. And so we're, always fighting for funding. We're doing bingos, making $1,000 to try to, and then, trying to support artists who are getting paid. Anyways, but colonialism's real. But then I want to get to what Brandi talked about. I'm so glad Brandi's here, and I've been sending messages going, I've never met Brandi, but now she's working in an area that I'm extremely excited about, and we go to the same institution, so I'm glad we can hang out a little bit here. But it's because of people like Brandi who are coming now. They have the energy, they have the youth, and they also have the amazing abilities to inherit those that have been working for a very long period of time, people like my father, people like many at the university, people like Emma LaRocque, who've been teaching here for almost 40 years, and fought all those battles for us to be here where I'm sitting right now. And I think my generation's kind of the beginning of a critical mass. You know what Brandi's generation is going to do? Make a whole new system, a whole new set of institutions, a whole new set of ideas, and that she's going to go, well, we don't need the art gallery anymore, because the art gallery is a Western idea of art. We don't need academic journals anymore. because that's a Western knowledge of archive. No, we don't need a university anymore. And it's not that we don't need those things. Of course, we need all of those things, but they're going to look absolutely different. The university is going to be outside. It's going to be in a lodge. That Indigenous art gallery is going to be, in an outside gallery of what's a sculpture garden, like Wayne was talking about. That publishing is going to not just be a bunch of squiggly lines on a piece of paper, but a living library with trees in it. Anyways, so that generation is the most competent in history. I was just saying to Brandi on the message that I wish I was you. And I wish I had you. I wish I had the training that you have, the people who believe in you. And I wish that I had the opportunity that you had. I'm now halfway middle age, heading towards my 50s. And because of people like you that give us this empowerment, it reminds us that all of the struggles that we went through are now being gifted to this incredible generation that are doing things. But I'm going to shut up now. So.
Well, no, we appreciate that, Niigaan. And actually, I want to ask Brandi, like, I know we have one more question actually, but Brandi, was there anything you wanted to share on this, on anything else? And it doesn't have to do with the question, if you don't want to.
I'm not good with answering questions, but I'm just very happy with the opportunities that I've had, especially in the past 2 years, and to be part of groups like the Manitoba Archaeological Society, where I'm as of February, I think, or maybe a bit later, I became the Indigenous Outreach Coordinator for the MAS. And I'm actually in a position where I can come up with my own ideas and have people that support those ideas. And so something that I'm very passionate about, which kind of started as, like a personal motivation of, I'm sick of being the only Indigenous student in my classes. And I don't want people like me in the future to go through the same struggles. And so my kind of journey in outreach projects and whatnot kind of started out of that personal motivation. But as I started to actually do outreach projects and get people to participate in them, I started to notice that, if my projects work, one day there will be more Indigenous anthropology students in the department. But one day those students are going to graduate. And then they're the ones that are going to be doing their own research on their own people, publishing with their own voices in the articles. And so youth outreach has been something that's very important to me. And so being in the position that I am now, I'm very grateful for that.
And I can also add, like, I'm definitely not Indigenous, but I do know what it's like to be that only one in a room. Like, I know Wayne spoke to that. Brandi, of course, you spoke to that. Niigaan, I don't know that you exactly spoke to that, but I know you have been many, many times. And as much as it's a great honor, it's a huge responsibility for everybody in the audience just listening. It's not easy to be that person. It's definitely not easy to be that person. And especially when you're walking into an institution like myself in media, you want to bring something new, you have to fit in, and you also have to make sure that all those things, those values that you had when you were outside, that you bring them inside. So hats off to you. Like, it's an amazing thing. We have one easy question I'm going to go to first. There was, where can we see Wayne's work, please and thanks? Wayne, take it away.
The easiest place is check out my website, strangerbronzeworks.com. And then you'll see the stuff that I've done. Still working on a few commissions yet, so pictures yet to be posted. I've only started doing commissions, so I started like 5 years ago. And commissions take, even when they say we want you to do something, it takes them 2 years to finally put something down on paper and get the contract. It's just a slow process. So so strangerbronzeworks.com. You can check things out there. And
your Instagram as well, because I was checking out your Instagram. Can you give the handle?
Yeah, it's just at Wayne Stranger, just all lowercase. You might see a few non-art posts in there. I'm a car guy too, so I post my follies when I'm fixing cars once in a while. So
now, the people over at the summit, the good folks at the summit, can you let me know if I can ask the third question? Is that okay? Thumbs up? Okay, right on. So Marilyn asks, and I think this, let me see. Okay, Marilyn asks or says, I find it disturbing that the Manitoba government has offloaded responsibility for heritage funding to local municipalities for several decades. When this happened, did the province continue to fund municipalities in this area? Perhaps municipalities need to allocate a percentage of provincial funds to MHAC on a 3 to 5 year basis to allow for further project planning. I want to encourage the present people involved to plan to continue the great work. I will do my best to share what I am hearing. So thank you, Marilyn. I don't know exactly which part of the questions, but anybody who wants to say, please jump in.
Well, it's just more of it's more of the immersiveness that I'm talking about here. We have a real challenge as a society in that two things. One is the institutions that we have created have profited, been birthed from, continue to perpetuate an idea of whiteness or frankly, white supremacy that then just perpetuates itself throughout society. And you know, as we are dismantling those things, remaking those things, renaming those streets and buildings and names, and you know, deciding who do we hold up in society? Do we want to hold up someone who massacred women and children in Saskatchewan? I'm talking about Sir John A. Macdonald there. Or do we want to talk about people that are invested in peace? And people who are invested in a community, in what Canada was supposed to be in the first place, which was supposed to be about community and multiculturalism, not about massacring a bunch of people on the plains so that you want to expand your train line. And this is not even a man of his time. This is just a massacred genocidal maniac. Then on, you know, as we remake society, we're going to necessarily involve changing those institutions. So that's the first level. And the problem is that when we give money to municipalities, it involves people who have succeeded the most at those institutions, therefore might be holding up some of the most problematic views. They're not bad people. They probably just learned bad things, or they learned things that are one-dimensional and one perspective. So the problem is we might not have public institutions that are competent for the time in which we live. And therefore, we've got to either invent new public institutions or radically change those institutions and therefore the people within them, or educate them, or engage them in a kind dialogue, add seats to the board, whatever, so that there's a cognizance and an awareness of what our society actually is. And what does that mean? 20% of Manitoba is Indigenous. That means 20% of every single thing in Manitoba, every sign, every street, every single installation should be Indigenous. And that would just be a start. I actually think it should be more like 50 to 70% for the next 50 years or so, because all of that supremacy has been dominating us for so long that just to begin to resemble our society, we need to have some way in which we can equalize and create some kind of sense of responsibility and representation. I think you're seeing that now a lot more, because what you're seeing is public works being involved in Indigenous installations and so on. Everyone's like, oh, all the Indians get everything now. No, it's that they get things for the first time. Their first time in history. And so therefore it's going to involve a whole different set of like, how do we remake things? It might be that we've done very well celebrating English and French heritage. We might want to think about other heritage that have built the country, and who is the ones we've neglected the most. Anyways.
Thank you for that, Niigaan. And I think that answered it. There's one more question I want to jump to really quickly, if I still have time, if that's still a thumbs up from everybody at the summit. Okay, so Alicia asks, Brandi, would you be willing to briefly discuss your point about how Indigenous youth are forced to sacrifice time with their family and community in order to access the same education and opportunities that non-Indigenous people get in cities? And then she puts in brackets, and your idea about bringing the education to the communities. And I appreciate Alicia for asking that, because I think a lot of people just don't realize that what you can't access and what you can. And so Brandi, please take it away.
This is a topic that's kind of emotional for me because it makes me reflect on my past 5 years of living in Winnipeg. So it's hard enough being an Indigenous person in post-secondary, and especially being in anthropology where I'm always the only one, a discipline that has a racist past, I'm already very uncomfortable and like major imposter syndrome. But also realizing how much I miss out by living here. And it's very, very difficult because when I was a high school student, like I started to realize like as my grandmother started coming around more often, she lives way further north, like in South Indian Lake. And so my family from further up north started to visit more, and I started to realize like I'm getting less time with them, and there's things that my grandmother are teaching my siblings and stories that she's telling my siblings that I'm not there to listen to. And the opportunity to learn the language, especially. I grew up learning Swampy Cree. My family mostly speaks Woodlands Cree, but living in Winnipeg, there's way different dialects, and that has been a whole other problem because there's apps and there's classes in the community that I can take, and even at the university, but there's only so much that those can really teach you if you don't have the people to speak to directly to in person. And especially a problem for me recently is a lot of these Cree classes, they just state that they're Cree classes. They don't specify which dialect it is. And I've had people tell me, is it really a big deal? And it is, because it's an identity thing. So I'm missing out on all these opportunities of hearing all these stories and learning the traditions, learning the language, to be here in a place where sometimes I don't feel wanted. Like my most difficult year was in my third year, where I was starting to learn more about the past of anthropology and how racist it's been towards Indigenous people. And at that point, there was also the protests happening for the pipeline being built in BC. And so I was participating in the protests, and so I was receiving a lot of racism in person, but also online before CBC turned off their comments. And so it's been very difficult to live in a city, in an institution, where sometimes I don't always feel like my voice is heard, or that I even feel welcome in my classes, which isn't the fault of the professors. It's just hard living out here, and there's a lot that you miss out on, and there's not the same opportunities living up north. And so I grew up in the PA, where there actually is a university there, but there's still limited programs. There is no anthropology program at University College of the North. And that's something that I would like to eventually bring to UCN, is that maybe an archaeological field school and a certificate program, so we can have more Indigenous monitors on archaeological sites, or they can be trained on site without necessarily having to do a full degree program and having to leave home for that degree program. And I think what's most important to me is that if I can establish these programs in UCN, and ideally both the PA and Thompson, is that means that I can work at UCN in the PA, and I can go back home for myself, but also that I can live and work in North. And a big goal with the Manitoba Archaeological Society is to retain more archaeologists in Manitoba, because a lot of people that graduate in Manitoba eventually leave, like within archaeology and anthropology, and sometimes leaving the country altogether. And so retention in Manitoba is very important. And as someone from Northern Manitoba, focusing on retention in Northern Manitoba would be ideal, because most of the archaeologists that work in Manitoba are living in Southern Manitoba. There's not really the opportunity to live and work outside within Northern Manitoba. And so I would like to bring some sort of program to the North, so that Indigenous youth don't have to leave their communities to study something that is important to them and something that they're passionate about. And hopefully that they can live in their communities and work in their communities without having to leave. So yeah, a little bit of a ramble, but.
No, that was not a ramble. I think it's what you're trying to talk about, or what you're talking about, is so hard for people who haven't experienced anything like it, because it's literally saying, I'm going after this goal, but I have to give up my culture, or I'm missing out on my culture. And if you never had to make that choice, it's very hard to understand it. And I appreciate you speaking more about it. I'm looking at the summit, and I'm looking at the time, and I want to talk all day, and I don't think I'm allowed to. let me know. No, I'm not getting a thumbs up to that. That's a no. That's a hard no. I should probably wrap, but I want to thank everyone at the summit for giving space to this. I want to thank Niigaan, Wayne, Brandi, for being so forthright and being so open, and also for calling out things and speaking plainly. I think we all need a lot more of that these days, and I appreciate it so much. I don't know how to wrap other than to say those things, but I'm looking at the summit and seeing if they can help rescue me, because as I said, I want to stay here and continue, but I don't think I'm allowed to.
Well, we're going to rescue you by saying merci beaucoup. Thank you very much, Keisha. You did a wonderful job moderating. Thank you to all our panelists. I'm very happy that there were some new connections made also. I think that's what conference is all about, right? Is that we make these connections, we learn from each other, and we change, right? That's part of it. And so thank you very much for being our moderator. Before we go into our next panel discussion, which is on the challenges and opportunity for heritage in rural Manitoba and Saskatchewan, I'm going to play a little bit of music just so then my wife's an occupational therapist, and she tells me that if we're staring at a screen for too long, we end up having eye fatigue, which means our concentration levels drop. So here's just a little moment for you to look away from your screen, maybe dance a little bit, do a little jig if that's what you want to do. But here we go.